You at least suspected. Big Pharma's hands are not clean in any of this. Specifically, I'm talking about Purdue Pharmaceuticals. They've been entangled in more lawsuits and dirty dealings than anyone else in the industry. And that's hard to beat because several huge pharmaceutical companies manufacture numerous brands of opioids. It just so happens that Purdue got their foot in the door first by marketing oxycodone, a powerful opioid, as a prescription drug. And you can't forget that if they're marketing this, it had to be approved by the FDA, which it was in 1995, and it hit the public in 1996. This meant that Purdue could move from targeting the terminally ill, post-operation cancer patients, all the way to targeting the general public through general practitioners. They even had the audacity to claim that only 1% of people who get prescribed the medication actually get addicted to it. And that if you showed signs of addiction, it was not a real addiction. It was a pseudo-addiction. And the cure was more of the drug. By the early 2000s, the lawsuits started to mount up against Purdue with many claims of prescription opioid addiction. In total, Purdue deceiving physicians and the public cost them about $634 million. But the family that owns Purdue Pharmaceuticals was worth roughly $13 billion last year. So I don't think that $364 million is making them feel hurt. And I promise all of this foundation is building up to a bigger scandal that just broke. But I have to set this foundation so that you can better perceive the magnitude of this story, because I'm sure that there are people out there who don't know much about Purdue Pharmaceuticals. So the good news to come out of this, which is perhaps too little too late, is that as of February of this year, Purdue has said that they'll stop promoting opioids to prescribers. So like I said, too little, too late. But at least it eventually happened, almost. You'll see what I mean soon. But then things got even worse for Purdue when it came out that they knew about OxyContin misuse years earlier than publicly acknowledged. It turns out that the Purdue executives knew about the abuse well before the 2000s, as well as abuse of another one of their opioids available to the general public. Eventually, it came out that they were telling their sales staff to push OxyContin as being less addictive than other opioids. And the reasoning behind that was that OxyContin, the Purdue brand of oxycodone, was a slow-release formula, or slow release, but it obviously didn't work properly. Eventually, multiple companies developed opioids and marketed them to general practitioners. So now, after all of that opioid manufacturing, there are several companies manufacturing drugs to fight opioid addiction. And the big story that I want to talk about today is called "Billionaire Blamed for Opioid Crisis Patents New Drug to Fight Opioid Addiction." So before I even start going through this article, let's just set some things straight right now. Purdue knew before the lawsuits in the early 2000s that there were serious addiction problems with their opioids, but they still marketed them as less addictive than other opioids, which seems like a play on words so that they're not outright lying perhaps. But on top of that, they didn't make the slow release aspect work properly. The theory behind it seems pretty solid. I mean, I'm no doctor at all, but I've seen drugs diffusing in a body modeled, and a slow release would provide a less intense feeling from the drug because people get addicted to the initial intense feeling from it. And that's, hypothetically going to make the drug less addictive if it's slow release. They just never bothered to work out the kink that it doesn't actually work. Their drug is still too intense, but whatever, we'll move on from that. Now, the Sackler family is the family that owns Purdue, and they own 100% of it. They also own drug companies in various foreign nations. Dr. Richard Sackler is one of the 6 inventors on the patent for a new drug to fight opioid addiction. It was approved in January, but just recently came to light, and the official rights to the patent were granted to Rhodes Pharmaceuticals, which is a subsidiary of Purdue. Here's the problem. The drug is a new version of buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is an opioid, although it's less intense than other opioids. So the idea is that it'll help wean people off of their heavier opioids. Plus, This means that Purdue found a way to prescribe opioids to the people already addicted. And I understand that it's supposed to help, but I'm just laughing at the fact that Purdue is still selling opioids, except now the customers are the people who bought their stuff the first time and enjoyed it way too much, so now they're back for more. Not to mention that Purdue was first approved to sell these toned down opioids in 2013, and Purdue was selling tablets with huge amounts of oxycodone that were supposed to be slow release so that they're abuse resistant, and people ended up easily finding ways to get the drug into their system much, much faster. And there were actually a few cases where Purdue was approved to sell a drug to treat opioid addiction, and it was just a way to trick the FDA into allowing Purdue to continue to sell to their addicts. But I'm sure that it'll continue because Purdue spent $620,000 on lobbying in 2018 alone as of July 24th. We're well past that now, but that's the last time that data was available. I mean, this entire opioid epidemic is just a drive to make Big Pharma rich while pillaging the middle class and the more susceptible members of society. I mean, think of how many people at some point in their life get a major surgery or just have some reason to be prescribed pain meds. And then they end up with oxycodone, they get hooked, and it ruins their life. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it certainly happens a fair amount. And I have a feeling that Purdue's lobbying money, and really just the rest of Big Pharma's lobbying money, isn't going towards tighter controls on opioids. In fact, it's likely the opposite of that. So that's really all for this video. I guess to recap the major story here quickly, the Sackler family obtained a patent to market another opioid to people who are already addicted to more powerful opioids. The problem is the confidence that Purdue has in people taking the medication to take it properly, because it can still be abused. What this means is that Purdue and the family that owns them gets to profit even more off of the people whose lives they helped to ruin in the first place. And are they helping now? Well, seeing how much of the research behind these drugs is up in the air and seeing how Big Pharma will never be for the good of society, I tend to think not. You can tell more about someone from what's not intended rather than what's intended. So, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate the support. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. If you feel like supporting my work beyond that, I have my Patreon linked below, as well as donation links and merch